extra time has gone wasted now. I started at 11 thinking that we will have some extra time. Okay, it has started recording, so good. And let me start sharing also. Yeah, what do you see?
Sir, still your video only.
Really?
Yes, sir.
Now it's
Sir,
okay.
okay, sir.
Now it is there, no? Now you can see my slides, right?
Yes.
Okay, good. So, very good. So we will continue from where we left, right? Yeah, so this side is easy, and that means you're assuming this. You're assuming this, and you have to prove lambda is absolutely continuous with respect to mu. So you will take an E such that mu of E is 0, right? And you have to show that lambda of E is 0. But what are you assuming? For every epsilon, there is a delta. So take any epsilon, there is a delta such that if mu E is less than delta, then mod lambda is less than epsilon. So take a small epsilon, correspondingly you get a delta. And what is mu E? You have assumed that mu E is
0.
0. So that is less than any delta, right? And therefore, yes, mod lambda E is less than the epsilon that you gave me. You give me smaller and smaller epsilon, lambda is less than that. So that means lambda is 0, right? So that side is easy. And the other side, you assume lambda is absolutely continuous with respect to mu, and you have to show this. And suppose not. Suppose this is not true. If this is not true, what happens? There is some epsilon such that however small delta you take, mod lambda is bigger than epsilon, right? There is such an E, right? There is a measurable set E such that mod lambda E cannot be made arbitrarily small. So if you say that this doesn't happen, then there is an epsilon such that I'm taking various delta. So En you will get in the sigma algebra such that mu of En is less than this. This is your delta, but still mod lambda En is bigger than epsilon. You agree? You're contradicting this statement. Yeah, whatever epsilon, there is an epsilon such that it's bigger than that, regardless of any delta. So in particular 1 by 2 power n, if you take, there is a corresponding En which contradicts this statement. This is okay?
Yes.
Yeah. So now you take this set. Do you remember this set? When we discussed which theorem did this notation we talked about? As I said, I'm not going to all the details, so I just want to give you, glimpses of various things. So at least let's recall when we discussed which theorem did this notation come up. Borel-Cantelli. And do you recall what is lim sup En? En is a countable, E1, E2, E3, etc. So what is lim sup En?
Union of this.
Union after finite terms and then intersection.
Union after finite terms and then take intersection. So union after finite terms will be sup, and then you take intersection, that will be like taking inf. Okay, so that particular set, if you consider, it's easy. You can, Rudin has all the details. In order to save time, I have skipped the details. This particular set, if you take, you can verify that that set has mu is 0, but its mod lambda itself is bigger than epsilon, and in particular this is bigger than 0. Okay, so that will contradict. So I have exhibited a set for which mu is 0 but lambda is not 0. That will contradict this, right? Forget verifying this, which is easy, which you do later. Okay, so I have exhibited a set for which mu is 0 but lambda is not 0. So mod lambda, so for mod lambda is not 0. So mod lambda is not absolutely continuous with respect to mu, in which case lambda cannot be absolutely continuous with respect to mu, right? Because if lambda is absolutely continuous with respect to mu, then mod lambda is absolutely continuous with respect to mu. That's easy. Okay, so basic point of this slide is absolute continuity can have an epsilon delta definition. Okay, so that word continuity is kind of explained. Okay. So next, this thing is what is called polar decomposition. This is basically, we have seen it twice. Of course, in complex numbers, you know that you will write z equal to r e power I theta, right? That is called polar decomposition, no?
Yes.
Agree?
Yes.
So, and in other words, instead of r e power I theta, we might write z as z by mod z times mod z, right? So z by mod z is a quantity of modulus 1 and then something which is positive. And then later we did the same thing for a measurable function, no? In fact, in lecture 1 itself. What was the idea? Given a measurable function, we have a measurable function of modulus 1. Given a positive measurable function, there is a measurable function of modulus 1 such that you can write f as alpha times a measurable function, right? Basically,
Yes.
f by mod f times mod f, but dividing by mod f always did not make sense, and we, gave a one-line argument. You remember this? And a similar thing is true for measures. Okay, so this was our definition of mod mu, no? Where supremum was over what?
Partition. Here is a
Partitions. Partition just meaning a disjoint union. Okay, so this was our definition of total variation, and mu is absolutely continuous with respect to mod mu, right? Because if mod mu of E is 0, then in particular mu E is 0, no?
Yes.
That follows the definition because E itself is a partition. So if supremum is 0, then mu itself is 0. So this is true. And therefore, you apply Radon-Nikodym to this line. So what will you get? You will get, right? When you have absolute continuity, this is a positive measure and mu is a complex measure. So you are in the situation of Radon-Nikodym. And can you apply Radon-Nikodym? So you have to give me one more thing, which is true. In order to apply Radon-Nikodym, the positive measure has to be sigma finite. So is mod mu sigma finite? Mu is an arbitrary complex measure. What do you know about mod mu?
Yes, sir. It's finite measures.
It's actually finite. Forget sigma finite. It's actually finite, right? Total variation measure is finite. Therefore, there exists an h in L1 of mod mu such that mu is h times d mod mu. You agree? This is applying Radon-Nikodym. And then I am leaving, two beautiful arguments, but I wanted to cover more, so I am skipping this. So what you are going to show is that mod h is 1 almost everywhere. So what you do is, how do you show equality? If you have to show A equal to B, what do you do? You show A less than or equal to B and then A greater than or equal to B, right? So you will show mod h less than or equal to 1 almost everywhere, which is more of a direct argument. And then you will show mod h greater than or equal to 1 almost everywhere, which is a very nice argument because you are going to use the average theorem. Okay, as I recall. But let's skip the details. You have shown that mod h equal to 1 almost everywhere, this particular h. But if mod h equal to 1 almost everywhere, then I can, in the measure 0 part, I can declare it as 1, no? And I can take h mod h to be 1. So h can be chosen so that this is true everywhere because measure 0 doesn't matter. Okay, there you declare it as 1 itself. So, yeah, so you have got a mu. So given a complex measure, you have written it as a modulus 1 function times the total variation measure. This is called the polar decomposition of measures. So it's an immediate consequence of Radon-Nikodym, right? This is exactly like that, right? Z equal to r e power I theta, which is like r and which is like e power I theta here. If this is Z, which is the analog of e power I theta and which is the analog of r?
X is equal to the
It's just equivalent to e power I theta and mod mu is the analog of r because mod mu is a positive measure. R is a positive number. Positive measure meaning non-negative. Okay. 0 to infinity, but it's finite, you know. Okay, so this is what is called the polar decomposition. Very useful result. We are going to use it again and again. And what you have to keep in mind is it's an immediate consequence of Radon-Nikodym. You are applying Radon-Nikodym to this identity. Okay, and a corollary is that when you have mu a positive measure, and if you take d lambda is to be g d mu with g in L1 mu, then this is automatically absolutely continuous, right? You are taking g in L1 mu and you are taking this, and then d mod lambda is mod g d mu. Why is this a corollary? So here polar decomposition had only one measure. You were taking its total variation measure. Now you are taking mu and g d mu, two measures. And then what one is saying is its total variation measure is just the absolute value of mod g. How do you do this? Because you know what is, so you know that mu is h d mod mu, right? Such an h exists, right? Yeah. So you also know that d lambda is, oh, by the way, this is not good notation. No, I should write d mu here, right?
Yes, d mu.
I should write d mu equal to h d mod mu. That's a better notation. So what you do is it's an immediate corollary because you have d lambda equal to h d mod lambda, right? For some h with mod h equal to 1. Agree? Apply this to lambda. Lambda is a complex measure here. So you will have d lambda equal to h d mod lambda. On the other hand, what is given to you is d lambda is g d mu. That was the definition of d lambda. So you can equate the two, right? What do you get when you equate the two? You will get h d mod lambda equal to g d mu. Yeah. Agree?
Yes.
So then what do you do? So you have h d mod lambda equal to h d mod lambda equal to g d mu. That's what you have. So you can multiply by h bar, right? The complex conjugate of h, if you multiply, you have h d mod lambda equal to g d mu. So if you multiply by h bar, this will become just d mod lambda. And here what will you get? Here you will get h bar g d mu. You agree? You had g d mu, you are multiplied with g bar, h bar. So you will get h bar g d mu.
Yes.
But h bar g d mu. But is h bar g same as mod g? Maybe there's a small typo here. And that's all that I can do here, no? If I will get d lambda equal to h d mod lambda. So I can equate with this. Yeah.
We have to show that h is equal to this mod of g, right? No.
I should show that h bar g equal to mod g, no? Because what you have is h d mod lambda equal to g d mu, right? H d mod lambda equal to g d mu. So in order to get d mod lambda, I multiply by h bar, so that h bar times h is 1. So on the right side, I'll get h bar g d mu. But why is h bar g same as mod g? Mod g is g bar. So yeah, mod g is g bar, right?
No.
So sorry, mod g square.
Yeah, mod g square is g bar. Correct. So h bar. Yeah, this is a small thing to check here. We have to also keep in mind that mu is given to be positive.
But here h bar is equal to 1, I think.
H bar is 1 that I have already used. Mu is positive. Okay. So what you know is because mu is positive,
Sir, here mod G is also equal to 1.
that we don't know, no? We have taken
But
that,
why the
no,
above?
it's not
Because
1, then we will not write mod G. G is some L1 mu function. Mod G need not be 1. So, but what you know is mu is positive. Okay, since I want to cover more, we will come back to this. Okay, there's one tiny thing that I'm missing. Let's discuss at the very end. Yeah, let's cover all the things, because the point of today's lecture was to go through everything remaining in the chapter. You remember this word Hahn decomposition? So there's a small thing. We are coming back at the end of the lecture. Okay, just remember, we'll come back here for the corollary. Do you remember this word? Did we mention this name earlier? Hahn, mathematician. How many of you remember? Say yes or no quickly so that we can move on.
yes, sir, we know.
Where did we discuss this? Where did we mention this name of this theorem?
I think in the starting of the Radon recording, we have defined.
Yeah, there was another name there. There was some decomposition. What was the name of that decomposition? Just like we wrote f equal to f plus minus f minus, we wrote the measure mu. We defined total variation, and then we defined positive and negative variation, right? And then we said that mu is mu plus minus mu minus. And what was the name for that decomposition?
Jordan
Decomposition. And then, earlier there was an obvious thing. If you write f as f plus minus f minus, and if you write f as g minus h, then there was a minimality condition, right? F plus is less than or equal to g, and f minus is less than. It's a similar minimality condition is true, and I must have said that this is a corollary to the Hahn decomposition theorem. Agree? That's where we stated it. So Hahn decomposition theorem is the following. Mu is what kind of a measure is mu from this notation?
signed measure.
Yeah, it's a sign measure. It's a real measure. Okay, and the decomposition theorem says that there exists A and B. Okay, so this is called the Hahn decomposition. Says that X is the disjoint union of A and B. A union B is X and A intersection B is empty. Okay, such that mu plus is given by intersecting with A. Mu plus is already defined, right? Mu plus is mod mu plus mu by 2, no? So this was already defined. But the theorem says that, Hahn decomposition says that there is a pair A comma B, disjoint and union is the whole of X, such that the positive variation is given by intersecting with A and negative variation is given by intersecting with B with a minus sign. This is the theorem. Okay, Hahn decomposition. Is the statement clear? I have not put all the English here.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes.
The statement says that there exists such an A and B, says that the sign measures are concentrated on these two sets. Okay, so the proof, the main idea is mu is a real measure, and this polar decomposition, right? We have already proved. For any complex measure, there's a polar decomposition. A real measure is in particular a complex measure, so you have the polar decomposition. Okay, so you got mod h equal to 1, right? But what extra can you conclude from mod h equal to 1? Because it's a real measure and not a complex measure, what extra can you say from h, about h? So h is usually a complex function, but mu is a real measure. So what can you say about h?
It's real h equal to 1.
So h will be a real function, right? Real valued function. But h is a real valued function and mod h equal to 1. So what are the possibilities? What are the values that h can take?
h is identically 1, I think.
Either
1 or -1.
Either 1 or
H
-1. So
identically.
Since mu is real, h can be taken to be real, and h is not identical. Hx can be 1 at some points and hx can be -1 at some points, no?
Yes.
Mod h equal to 1 just means
Yes.
mod of h of x is 1. So h of x can be 1, h of x can be -1. Okay, that's what I mean by h equal to plus or minus 1. Okay. Now you make a guess for a and b and then the proof is over. You make a guess and proving it is another thing.
Sir, A
Yeah.
will be the set where h takes value 1 plus 1 and
Absolutely.
B.
Okay, so that's it. So I'm not even writing it because I want to go fast, no? So Hahn decomposition, you will remember the structure of the proof, no? You're using polar
Yes, sir. By this way,
decomposition.
it is easy.
Huh?
Sir, by this way, this is easy to remember.
Yeah, easy to remember. So you have to fill up the gaps, okay? You have to make this guess and then you have to show that with that guess, this is true. Okay, that you can show. So recall the corollary we stated earlier. So I'm not even stating it, but verbally, what is a corollary?
If,
Mu is
there-
mu plus minus mu minus is the Jordan decomposition. Suppose there are some other two measures and you write mu as lambda minus nu or something, then mu plus is
Then
less
lambda
than
is-
equal to lambda and mu minus is less than
mu.
equal to nu. Okay,
Mu.
so this is the corollary and that corollary easily follows from this, which also I refer you to Rudin. Okay, there's a one-line argument. It's very easy. Okay, since we are recalling the corollary, that's good enough for us for now because in today's lecture I want to cover a lot of topics. Is that okay? Can we go to the next topic? Yeah, so what is the main points of this slide quickly? You know how to prove Hahn decomposition theorem, skipping one or two small details, and then the corollary we recalled. And remember that the minimality, so that's a way of remembering that corollary. It is called the minimality in Jordan decomposition. That's enough, no? The English word is expressive enough for you to recall the maths result, right?
Sir, what's
Yeah.
the relation between this and that corollary? I am not.
Corollary of this is the minimality in Jordan decomposition. I'm not stating the corollary here. I'm recalling.
Oh, so you are giving the proof with the help of Hahn decomposition of that corollary.
Yes.
Okay.
So the point is when you write f equal to f plus minus, f plus is minimal with that property, f minus is minimal with that property. You did not need a theorem. That was easy. It is just definition of function. But when you have a similar decomposition for measures called the Jordan decomposition, again the same minimality is true. Meaning mu is mu plus minus mu minus is true. Of course, that is called the Jordan decomposition. Now suppose you have two other measures, positive measures,
Yes.
lambda and nu, such that mu is also lambda minus nu. Then it is true that mu plus is less than or equal to lambda and mu minus is less than or equal to nu. But you need a proof.
Yes.
And that proof is a corollary to the Hahn decomposition result. You will get this set on which it is concentrated, and using that you have a one-line argument.
Okay.
And that one-line argument I'm not doing here. I'm just referring you to Rudin. Clear?
Okay, sir, we'll do that.
But the main point that I want to stress is that it's not automatic. You need this theorem, Hahn decomposition, which is a corollary to polar decomposition, which is a corollary to Radon-Nikodym. Whatever we are doing today, these are the last parts of chapter 6 of Rudin, is the power of Radon-Nikodym. You know, what all follow from Radon-Nikodym. That's why the lecture is titled Consequences of Radon-Nikodym. Okay, fine. So I want to put certain things in such a way that you will, remember the main statements. Okay, filling up the gap is another thing. Okay, so that is the key idea here. Now this is a famous application, right? So what is the result here? What is dual of LP?
LQ.
LQ of
1 by P.
Mu, the dual is LQ of the same mu or some other measure?
Same mu.
Same mu. So LP mu is LQ mu, where P and Q are conjugates, right? 1 by P plus 1 by Q is 1. And it's important that P not equal to infinity here. So
yes.
What P equal to 1, what is the dual of L1?
L infinity.
That is true. That is part of our proof. But L infinity dual is not L1. And that's, it's also a famous result. L infinity dual is not L1. Okay. So P not equal to infinity, LP dual is LQ. I will only give you the main ideas. Okay. We are not doing the full proof rigorously, but let's see how nicely Radon-Nikodym is used. Okay. So mu is here a positive measure. Okay. Mu is a positive measure, but in order to apply Radon-Nikodym, you have two measures, no? A positive measure and also a
complex measure or
complex measure which is absolutely continuous with respect to mu. So that we will construct, okay, and then apply Radon-Nikodym. So we have a well-defined map from LQ mu to LP mu star. Star meaning the dual. What is dual? For a non-linear space, what is dual?
collection of all continuous linear functional.
Continuous is same as bounded, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you see that this map is well defined. It's a good map. If you take G in LQ, I am giving you a linear functional. So that means you take a vector in LP mu and I have to give you a complex number, right? So take a function f and integrate with respect to G with the given measure d mu. Is this a linear functional? F going to, so I'm calling it phi G because associated to G I'm defining integrating with respect to G. Is this linear? Linearity is clear, no? If you have
Linear.
F1,
Sir.
F2, yeah. Yeah, go ahead. Is there a question?
No, sir. Akshay is saying on the chat that he is not able to see the slides and also.
Oh, others can see?
Yes, sir. Maybe
Yes, sir.
that will be the.
So maybe his internet is not good. So maybe somebody can WhatsApp him just to quit and come back. Maybe that will solve the problem.
Okay, sir.
Okay. But others, if I replace f by f1 plus f2, it will be f1 plus f2 here. But integral is linear, no? Right?
Yes, sir.
So I will get f1 plus f2 goes to phi g of f1 plus phi g of. So phi g is linear is clear. But phi g is linear is not enough for it to be a continuous linear function. So I need phi g to be continuous also. But that's also okay. Why is phi g continuous? Linearity is obvious. And can you give me the crucial word why phi g is continuous?
Holders.
What?
Holders inequality.
Holders inequality, because mod of phi g of f is less than or equal to, so that mod of phi g of f. So that is modulus of this integral. That will be less than or equal to integral of the modulus. But integral of the modulus is one norm, no? Integral of the modulus is a one norm of fg, which will be less than or equal to the p norm of f times the q norm of g. So you got some constant, which is this, times the p norm of f. So that shows this is phi g is a bounded functional, right? So continuity is holder. Now is this, so this is a vector space, this is a vector space, is it linear? Is this map linear? That is also obvious because if you replace g1 by g1 plus g2 or alpha g1 plus beta g2, here you will get alpha g1 plus beta g2, but integral is linear. So that shows that this map is also linear. Agree? So you want to say that these two are isomorphisms. This is an isomorphism, right? That's the result, no? Agree? You have to show that this is an isomorphism. What all we have shown up to now? We have given a map and we have shown that it's a linear transformation. Is it injective? Suppose phi g is 0. That means phi g of f is 0. That means integral fg is d mu is 0 for all f. When can that happen? If integral fg d mu is 0 for all f, then what can you say about g? Are you there? I can't hear anybody.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So integral fg d mu is 0 for all f. Then what can you say about g?
G should be 0 almost everywhere.
G should be 0. So that shows injectivity. Okay. So what is the crucial thing to do? What is the most important thing to do now? You have given a linear transformation, you have shown it's injective, you have to show it's an isomorphism. So what is remaining?
Sir, sorry, but Akshay and Suraj are not able to join the meeting this time.
Akshay and Suraj.
Suraj, they are showing here, but not able to see the video.
But ask them to quit and come back, no? Ask them to quit the meeting.
Yeah, I asked them to quit, but after that they are not able to find where is the meeting happening.
It may be their internal problem, I think. Because meeting, others can see the meeting, no? I can see the meeting. Now I am presenting this desktop, right? You can see, no? The meeting is there, 31 minutes over. Can you see my cursor moving?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so this they should be able to see. Maybe somebody can take a screenshot of this and send it on WhatsApp.
Yes, sir.
Hopefully, but I don't know whether that will be helpful, but you can just try. But let's just continue. Okay, hopefully they can join, otherwise they can watch the video later. Shall we continue?
Yes, sir.
So tell me, we have given a linear map between these two vector spaces. We have shown it is injective. What is remaining in order to show it's an isomorphism?
Surjective and
Surjective, right? Surjective. So what is surjectivity? If you give me a continuous linear function on LP, I have to give you a function g in LQ such that phi of f equal to phi g of f. Phi of f equal to integral f g d mu. That is important, that we have to do. And also note that from Holder's inequality, this follows, no? This is the operator norm of phi g. What is the operator norm? How do you define the operator norm?
supremum of phi gf, where f is norm of f is less than equal to 1 or
Yeah, another way is
phi.
You if you have an operator t, you know that it's bounded, so you will get norm of tv less than or equal to some m times norm of v. So you got that constant m, and you can take the infimum of those constants, right?
Yes, sir.
The optimal constant is the norm. So because this is true with the q norm of g, it follows that the operator norm of phi g is less than or equal to the q norm of g. You agree?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Can you guess the statement? What should be the theorem regarding these two norms? We have already claimed that we are going to show surjectivity. That means any phi here will be of the form phi g. And you have this natural inequality from Holder. What should be the extra claim? If the world was nice, if everything is nice.
Norm of phi g equal to norm of GQ.
Yeah, so this inequality is actually an equality. Okay, so then what is the word for this isomorphism between non-linear spaces? It's an isomorphism which is an
Isometrically isomorphic.
isometry. Okay, it is also an isometry. So that is the result. So when you are identifying two non-linear spaces, if you say LP dual is LQ, that means there is an isometry, no? If it is just a vector space isomorphism, you cannot say dual is that, no? Identification means isometry. That is a correct notion, right? In non-linear spaces. So that is what we have to show. And map is clearly linear. And this we are going to show under sigma finiteness. Why we are showing this only under sigma finiteness?
Because we are going to
Use
apply
Radon-Nikodym. Okay, so that under your usual result that LP dual is LQ, you are assuming that you have a sigma finite measure. So the map is clearly injective. The claim is that it's also surjective, and moreover it's an isometry. Okay, this is what I just said verbally. Shall we start the proof? So when we start the proof, again I'll skip some details, but I'll give you an overall view. The most important conceptual points I'll give. Tell me, where should I start? What should I start with? I need to show surjective. So what will be my starting sentence? I should show that this map is surjective. So what should I start with?
Take a linear function on all LP mu.
Yeah, and what should be my notation? If this was called phi g, what is a good notation for that arbitrary linear bounded linear functional that you start with?
Phi.
Capital phi, right? I can call it just capital phi without any subscript. Okay, given a capital phi here, I have to exhibit a g such that phi is phi subscript g. Okay, so let us start with a phi in LP mu star, and without loss of generality, I am assuming that its norm is positive. Why? Because if norm is 0, it is a norm. If norm of phi is 0, then phi is 0. If phi is 0, then you can take g to be 0. So if norm of phi is 0, it's obvious. So therefore you can assume that norm is positive. And we want to define. So now we are going. So the main point is we are going to apply Radon-Nikodym. So using phi, I will define a complex measure and will show it's absolutely continuous, etc. Okay, so using phi and show that lambda is absolutely continuous with respect to mu. And if we do that, what will you get by Radon-Nikodym? If we do this much, suppose we do this, what will you get by Radon-Nikodym?
D lambda equal to phi d mu.
You will get lambda of E equal to integral Radon-Nikodym you are applying. You will get a function, no? Right? If lambda is absolutely continuous with respect to mu, and if you apply Radon-Nikodym, you will get the Radon-Nikodym derivative, right? You will get an L1 function such that lambda of E is integral h d mu, g d mu, whatever. You will get a function, no? So then appeal to Radon-Nikodym, and therefore you will get a function g. Where is this g? This g is in
L1 mu.
L1 mu. Okay. So this g is in L1 mu, and then we will show that that particular g has all the required properties. Meaning, with respect to g, when you define phi g, that phi g equals this phi that you start with. Okay. This is the strategy. And all this we are going to do. What is the title of the slide?
Finite measure.
Finite measure. So then you have to do general sigma finite measure. Measure may be infinite, but it is sigma finite. Okay, so this is how the proof is divided. You're going to do the finite case first and then the general case. Okay, and general case I will not do because the most important concepts are here. Okay, so this is what one has to do. So therefore you have to start by defining a lambda. Agree? You have to define a natural complex measure lambda, and you have to show it's absolutely continuous with respect to mu, and the natural measure that you can think of is what is given to you is phi, right? So one measure that you can think of is you take a sigma algebra M, you take a set there and you take its characteristic function. Characteristic functions will be in LP for any P, no? You agree that characteristic function of any set will be in LP? Why is that? Just apply the definition. Why is it in L1, for example? L1 of x. So integral x chi e d mu. That is mu of e, right? It's in L1 meaning that should be finite. But why is mu of e finite?
We are taking finite measure.
Yeah, so mu of x itself is finite. So mu of anything in M is finite. Therefore, this is chi e is in L1 or LP, any LP. Yes. And therefore phi of chi e makes sense because phi is a linear functional on LP. Continuous linear functional on LP. So this definition is perfectly fine, right? This is the most natural definition of a measure, potential measure that you can think of. You agree?
Yes, sir.
Now you have to check that this is a measure. That means you have to show countable
additivity.
But in order to show countable additivity, you show it for two sets first. Is it true that if you have A union B disjoint, then phi of chi A union B, no, lambda of A union B is lambda A plus lambda B. If that itself is not true, then there's no way you are getting countable additivity. So is the most natural thing, can you try? Suppose
Yes,
A and
sir.
B are disjoint, and what is lambda of A union B? It will be phi of chi subscript A union B. But what is chi subscript A union B?
Summation of chi A and chi B.
Because A and B are
Disjoint.
disjoint, and therefore you got phi of chi A plus chi B. But phi is linear, no?
Yes.
Therefore you got phi of chi A plus phi of chi B, which is lambda of A plus lambda of B. Therefore, for any finite union, you have done, right?
Yes.
Now let us skip this slide because I want to save time. Any finite union, this is a crucial thing to remember. Any finite union you are done because lambda is, because phi is
Linear.
linear. Now I am claiming that a countable union is also done because phi is fill up the blanks.
Continuous.
Because phi is continuous. Okay, so you have guessed that. This is how mathematics progresses. If you make the correct guess, then you know there's a way of doing it. You may take a 1 week to fill up the gaps on your own, but you can do it. But the idea wise, it's clear, no? Because finiteness is algebra, right? Finite objects, if you deal with, that's mostly algebra, no? X plus y whole square, x plus y whole power n. That's all algebra. Finite objects, counting, combinatorics. Okay, but infinite things come, then it's more, a little bit more analysis comes there, right? And therefore, you are using something from analysis, which is continuity. How will such a thing proceed? Can you take another guess about the proof? If you know the result for finiteness, how will you prove the result for in the countable case using continuity?
Construct a sequence.
Yeah. So what is the most, if you have countable union E1, E2, E3, etc., what is a finite union which kind of goes to the infinite union?
Take a union of first n EIs and
take union up to n, and then if you take that, if you take the limit, then that is a full union. So that's what we should do, right? So let's quickly see the proof with not all the details. For countable additivity, you define AK to be the finite union and consider this particular thing, norm of chi E minus chi AK in the P norm. Okay, so what do you have to show?
this goes to 0.
This goes to
0 as
zero,
k,
right? This goes to 0. If this goes to 0, then why is it good enough?
Because then the phi that
Then continuity of phi we can use.
Yeah, because
Phi
phi
of
is continuous. Phi is a continuous linear functional on LP. So in the P norm of this differences goes to 0, then phi of chi E and phi of chi AK are close to each other, right? So phi of chi AK in the limit is phi of chi E, and that's what we had to do, no, for countable additivity. Agree? In the limit, phi of chi AK will be the summation of phi of EI because of finite additivity, and the other side is lambda of E. So you will get. So this goes to 0 is what you have to show. Now, why is this going to 0? What is this P norm? Apply the definition of P norm. What will this be? This will be integral chi E minus chi AK power P whole power 1 by P. So what is it?
integral over union from k plus 1 to infinity.
Yeah, but directly you can do, no? Directly you apply this. Then this is just E minus AK, right? No, directly you apply. So integral of chi E minus chi AK, right?
And then linear.
Modulus of chi E minus chi AK power P is what you have, no? Right? But modulus of chi E minus chi AK, what are the possible values that it can take? Chi E minus chi AK. If something is already in the first k EI, then the value is 1 minus 1, which is 0. If it is beyond ek, this is a disjoint union. If it's beyond ek, then it is 1 minus 0, which is 1. So values of this function is only 0 or 1, no?
Yes.
So in fact, this is nothing but chi subscript e minus ak, right?
Yes, sir.
So mod power p is same as mod because it is 1 or 0. So the integral is mu of e minus ak. Mu of e minus mu of ak. So this is nothing but mu of e minus ak power 1 by p. And that goes to 0 as k goes to infinity. Why? Because as k goes to infinity, ak goes to e, no? It's more and more union. So this measure goes to 0. Here you are crucially using what fact? That this goes to 0, you are using crucially what fact?
This is
Yes.
increasing, means AK is increasing. And
Yeah, that is fine. But still the power 1 by p, why should it go to 0? You know, some quantity goes to 0, but that quantity power 1 by p also goes to 0. That is because p is not infinity.
P is not infinity.
Because if p is infinity, then this power is 0. So all those powers will be 1. So it will be constant sequence 1. Okay, so p not equal to infinity. This is the point where we are using. This goes to 0, and therefore this happens, and therefore it is the continuity of phi that is used. Phi of chi ak goes to chi e, therefore phi of chi ak goes to phi of chi e because of continuity of phi. Okay, so phi is a, so you got a measure, and this measure is clearly absolutely continuous. Why is it so clear? Because why did I say clearly this is true?
Because phi of psi k will be 0.
Phi of,
if measure of E is 0, then phi of psi k is 0.
yeah, measure of E is 0, then phi of chi E will be 0. Absolutely, right? Because phi of chi E will be into mu of E power something, no? So that will be 0. No, phi of chi E will be
Mu of e to the power 1 by p.
no.
No. It is the only linear
Phi is an
function.
arbitrary continuous function. So if measure of E is 0, then phi of chi E is 0 is what you have to show. And why is that?
Maybe we can use the sequential criteria here also.
Do you need all that? Because if measure of E is 0, chi E you are considering as a function where? Chi E is considered as a function in LP, no?
LP.
And in LP everything is almost
norm of phi of chi.
almost everywhere. So chi E is the 0 function. The equivalence class of chi E is the equivalence class of the constant function 0, right? If mu E is 0, then where is chi E not 0? Sorry. Yeah. If mu of E is 0, which set chi E is not 0 by definition? Chi E is either 0 or 1. So chi E non-zero is precisely E, no? The characteristic function of E is non-zero precisely on the set E, right?
So chi is almost everywhere 0.
All chi is almost everywhere 0. So the equivalence of chi E, equivalence class of chi E is the equivalence class of 0. So phi of chi E is phi of 0. And phi is a linear transformation, so phi of 0 is 0. That's why it's clear. So clearly lambda is absolutely
Do like this, that norm of phi chi is less than or equal to norm of phi norm of chi, and norm of chi would
yeah,
be
from that also you can show.
Yeah.
From that also you can show. But the continuity, I mean, linearity of phi is enough. Chi E is 0. It's the same equivalence class. Okay, so lambda is absolutely continuous with respect to mu. Therefore, you will get a G. Why? G is in L1 mu. This is by Radon-Nikodym, such that you will get lambda of E equal to integral of G d mu. And the claim is that phi equal to phi G. Okay, and norm of phi g will be norm of phi. G has all the correct properties, and but the crucial point is you're going to, at this stage you are going to show where do you have to show phi equal to phi g, on which space? Finally, phi equal to phi g you have to show on which space? Where is phi? Where are phi and phi g defined? Phi and phi g are defined on
LP.
Yeah, phi and phi g are elements in LP mu star. That means phi and phi g are defined on LP. So equality means you have to show the equality of phi and phi g on LP. On LP. Okay, you have to show the equality on LP. But at this stage, you are going to show the equality on L infinity. Okay, so this part also I am skipping. So how do you show equality on L infinity? What is L infinity? What is L infinity? What's the definition of L infinity?
Collection of